Welcome to the Numbers Game, Week 16, the show where analytics meets the action and data drives the decisions. I'm Cynthia Frelund, and together we will deep dive into the stats that define the remaining 15 games on this week's slate and uncover how the numbers make all the difference. It is not just about what happens, it's about why it happens and how the numbers help tell the story. I cannot thank you enough for your part in helping our community to grow to 10,000 subscribers. This means so much to me and inspires me to keep expanding and growing and making this thing even better for you. I love all of the feedback, all of our comments, banter. It is amazing. I am in awe and filled with gratitude. It is the holiday season and everyone is extra busy, which makes me even more appreciative of you choosing to spend some of your time and energy with me. Last week, my model went 14 wins and 2 losses straight up, 10 and 6 ATS, and 7 and 9 on totals. That brings my season through 15 weeks with only 3 weeks of regular season games to go to 70.5% straight up, 52.9% ATS, and 50.2% on totals. Starting with the first Saturday game, the Chiefs host the Texans at Arrowhead in a game where the total is 39.5 points, and Kansas City is a 2.5 point favorite. With a win and a Bills loss, the Chiefs would lock up the 1 seed, which means home field advantage throughout the playoffs, and of course, that first round playoff bye. Last year, CJ Stroud had excellent production against zone defense. With the 5th most yards, he was also tied for the most touchdowns at 15 and had the fewest interceptions at 2. This year, his yards are tracking at 7th, but the touchdown to interception ratio is quite different, with 9 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. He had a 104.1 passer rating, that was second highest last year, which is now tracking at 85.8, which is down to 24th this season. The 3 main things driving the why behind this year's decrease are defenses doing a better job disguising coverages pre-snap, 2, the O-line being a big problem, especially the interior that has allowed 27 sacks. By the way, 6 full teams have allowed 27 or fewer sacks total. And 3, offensive penalties combined with the pressures, those things go hand in glove, have increased the amount of times he's in longer distance to go situations by about 27%. Stroud has been sacked 45 total times already after only being sacked 38 times in all of last season. So let's look at an area Steve Spagnuolo's Chiefs defenses have ranked in the top 5 since 2019, which is generating unblocked pressures via blitzing. They have 52 total unblocked pressures so far this season. That's second most in the league, and 43 of them have come when blitzing. That's the league's highest number. The Chiefs blitz at the 4th highest rate and increase their pressure rate by about 17.7 percentage points when they do. That's the 3rd largest positive increase in the league. Stroud has been pressured on 50% of dropbacks against the blitz this season, which is the 4th highest rate, and sacked the 5th most often when blitzed. To wrap this all up, Houston has allowed a league-high 49 unblocked pressures. 30 of them have come from blitzes. With Patrick Mahomes dealing with a high ankle sprain and some uncertainty around his week-to-week status, it's worth setting the stage for what a Kansas City quarterback will be contending with, be it 15 or Carson Wentz. Mahomes has taken a career-high 2.5 sacks per game and 7.3 quarterback hits per game this season. The Texans defense has pressured opposing quarterbacks at the 3rd highest rate and are one of only 2 teams with multiple defenders generating 50 or more pressures. Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson also both ranked top 7 in sacks this season, and they're the only teammate duo to have 10 or more sacks each. Hunter leads the NFL with 86 pressures, and Anderson ranks 7th with 50. Bottom line, this is where coaching, sports science, one of my favorite parts of data science, and the advantage Kansas City's defense provides drives the day. I've modeled this currently with a 75% healthy Patrick Mahomes, and I have a 2-point win for the Chiefs, 23-21. Kansas City winning ranks 11 of 16 in confidence. Unfortunately for the Chiefs, the Bills, who are looking to make up the 2 games they'd need to overtake the Chiefs, have a home game against the Patriots, where Buffalo is favored by 14 points and the total is 46.5. We are on record with a bunch of good Drake May stats, so let's do one on Christian Gonzalez, who's the only player in the NFL who's been the nearest defender on more than 10 deep attempts. He's faced 12 and allowed 1 or fewer completions. He has a 67% forced tight window rate on deep passes with 4 passes defensed. Thanks in part to Gonzalez, the Pats are one of just 7 teams to allow 2 touchdowns or fewer on deep passes. Did Josh Allen already lock up the MVP? This is actually about the time of year where the votes are cast. Anyways, Allen has 16 touchdowns when defenses blitz, which is the highest in the league. He's attempted the 12th most passes against the blitz, but only been sacked at the third lowest rate. He also averages 9 yards per pass when defenses send at least one extra man. That's the 8th highest. And some teams blitz because they're trying to create pressure on a quarterback, and some do it because their secondary is really great so they can trust them. While Christian Gonzalez is great, overall, it's more likely that the Pats are manufacturing pressure. They blitz at the 6th highest rate and have allowed the 6th most yards per pass, along with tied for the most touchdowns when blitzing. Bottom line, I have a very comfortable Bills win, 30-15. Bills have the best O-line in the AFC by win share, allowing the fewest sacks at 13 total, and have not allowed Allen to be sacked once in 4 games. The Pats rank 28th in sacks with just 27 total. Buffalo winning ranks first of the 16 games this week. There are big-time AFC playoff implications in the second Saturday game, round 2 of Steelers and Ravens, this edition in Baltimore. If Pittsburgh wins, they win the AFC North. If Baltimore wins, they punch their ticket to the postseason. They can also get in this week should the Colts or Dolphins also lose. The line is 6 points in favor of the Ravens, and the total is 45 points. In Week 11, the Steelers won at home 18-16. In that game, Baltimore had 3 giveaways, 2 missed field goals, and 12 penalties. Let's take a look at the deep passing story for the Steelers. Russell Wilson has fewer than 200 passing yards in each of his last 2 games that George Pickens has missed with a hamstring injury. Pickens leads the NFL with 14 receptions and 474 yards on deep targets, while the rest of Pittsburgh's players, they have 9 receptions and 276 yards on deep targets. Let's go one layer deeper. Wilson has averaged a league-high 6.3 air yards per attempt on quick passes. Remember, those are the ones that happen in under 2.5 seconds. Earning a league-high 18% explosive play rate on them. Remember, those are passes that net the offense at least 15 yards. But last week against the Eagles, he had his fastest time to throw since 2019 at under 2.4 seconds and only threw 3 of his 22 quick passes past the sticks. He also has the most passing attempts on the run this season at 27%. My point? Wilson is exhibiting some traits of being less comfortable without Pickens and as defenses adjust to him as the Steelers starter. 27% of the Raiders' rushes this season have come against stacked boxes. That's the 5th highest rate in the league. Their 2.3 rushing yard over expected per carry against stacked boxes looks are the most by any team since 2018. The Steelers have allowed the 12th highest rushing success rate on plays where they stack the box. Bottom line, I have the Ravens by a touchdown, 27-20. In Week 11, the Steelers gave Lamar a single high on 77% of dropbacks. This is aligned with their trend of about 69%, which is the highest rate in the league. Jackson had his second lowest completion percentage on such throws in a game this season in that Week 11 game at 48%. He did have a touchdown and an interception. However, between a forecast uptick in his ability to navigate single high, it is very hard to have the same results in 2 matchups once you know it's coming and you're Lamar Jackson, especially if TJ Watt, who's been limited in practice, is unable to go. And also, adding on top of that, improvements to the Ravens' defense that correspond to areas where the Steelers are likely to be depleted. George Pickens has not practiced as of this recording. That drives the Ravens to even the season series. Baltimore winning ranks 5th in confidence. Fun fact, Lamar Jackson is 12-0 in his career as a starter in Week 15 or later, the best record among 148 quarterbacks with 10 or more such starts since 1970. Even though I have the Ravens winning, earning a playoff berth, and holding off the Steelers from clinching the division, let's go to the next one of those scenarios that the Ravens would need in order to earn a wildcard berth should they lose to the Steelers. And that is the game I forecast to be the most popular upset pick of the week. The Niners at the Dolphins. Miami is a 1-point favorite and the total is 46 points. Brock Purdy has used play action on just 19% of his dropbacks this season, the lowest rate in his 3-season career. But he is still great when he does, with the 3rd most yards per attempt at 11.1 and the 5th most EPA per dropback. Maybe Kyle Shanahan dials it up more in this one in South Florida because the Finns have allowed the 10th most passing yards and 2nd most EPA per dropback against play action. Tua Tagovailoa is sticking with his trend of being the fastest passer in the NFL for the 2nd season, with a 2.42 second time to throw. He's top 5 in yards per pass at 7.1 and EPA per pass on them. And the Niners have allowed the 7th highest success rate to them since Week 8. They are also a bottom 10 defense in CPOE and passer rating allowed over that time period. Bottom line, I'm not going to go with what is potentially a very popular pick. I am not picking the Niners. I have Miami by 2, 25-23. I have the Dolphins with a only 7% chance to make the playoffs, but keeping their hopes alive this week. Miami winning ranks 13 of the 16 games this week. Let's round out that Baltimore playoff berth situation should they lose to the Steelers and go to Indy next, where the still playoff eligible Colts host the Titans as 3.5-point home favorites. The total in this one, 42.5. The Titans defense has allowed the sixth fewest yards per play against play action at just 7.5 and have the ninth best EPA per play action dropback. Anthony Richardson has used it at the second highest percentage, about 33%, and has the second worst passer rating along with the third worst success rate on them this season. Anthony Richardson has also scrambled for 238 yards and 3 touchdowns with a 48% explosive run rate on scrambles this season, which is the second highest rate in the league among quarterbacks. Richardson has generated 3.5 rushing yards over expected per scramble. That's the second most among these same quarterbacks. And the Titans defense has allowed the sixth most, or 279 yards, due to scrambles in the NFL. Bottom line, I have Indy keeping their playoff hopes alive by 4, 23-19. The Titans defense may be well suited to decrease some of Richardson's play action production, but overall, they are still allowing top 3 in terms of total yards and passing yards per game. After making a switch to Mason Rudolph at quarterback and potentially decreasing their capacity for turnovers, it is still not enough to tip the scales in the Titans' favor. This is the perfect spot for our AI segment, the Synth AI list. Thank you for voting on this great name and for Cher for coming up with it. There were a lot of great submissions, which were very fun and funny to read, so thank you all. Just a reminder of what this is. Instead of us asking a question and getting an answer from a trained AI model, we flip that paradigm on its head. AI question 1. What are the odds CJ Stroud rushes for more than 9.5 yards against the Chiefs? My model has him for 18 in the median projection and over 9.5 in 61%, which would be considered bland if this were the menu segment of our show. AI question 2. What is more likely? Josh Allen to rush for more than 44.5 yards against the Pats, or Jalen Hurts to rush for more than 39.5 against the Commanders? Spoiler alert, I have both scoring a rushing touchdown, but only Hurts goes over his number. I have 42 yards for Josh and 48 for Jalen. In what forecast to be a lopsided victory for the Bills, I have a higher probability game plan being handoffs and not designed quarterback runs or scrambles. As for Hurts, the Commanders are good at limiting extra yards for running backs and not missing tackles on running backs and limiting running backs' yards after contact. Can you understand what I'm doing here? It shifts a few more of the yards on the ground to the quarterback, which brings us to Eagles at Commanders. If the Eagles win, they clinch the NFC East. If the Commanders win and the Falcons and either the Seahawks or Rams lose, then they clinch a playoff berth. Philadelphia is a 3.5-point road favorite, and the total is 45.5 points. Jalen Hurts has the 5th highest passer rating against the blitz this season at 117.4 and the 6th best passing success rate when facing at least one extra rusher. Washington has blitzed at the 11th highest rate and allowed the 2nd most yards per pass when they do at 9.0, along with the 3rd highest passing success rate. For the Commanders, Frankie Louvu has 26 total pressures this season, 8 of which have resulted in a sack. His 31% pressure to sack conversion rate is the highest among defenders with at least 15 pressures. In their Week 11 matchup against the Eagles, Louvu generated 3 pressures, with 2 of them being sacks across just 14 pass rushes. By the way, no other Commanders defender recorded a sack in the game. Bottom line, I have the Eagles by 4, 25-21. I made it this far, but I have to give one Saquon stat. Barkley has averaged 7.2 yards per carry across 152 carries in the second half of games this season. That's 1,091 yards, along with 8 touchdowns. That is the most among running backs, obviously. He has 466 rushing yards over expected in the second half of games, which is over 150 more than the next closest player. Barkley carried the ball 11 times for 90 yards and 2 TDs in the second half of Week 11 against the Commanders. Of those 90 yards, 69 of them came before contact. That is tied for his second most in a second half this season. The Eagles winning ranks 8th in confidence. Another NFC team looking to clinch a playoff berth this week is the Packers, who host New Orleans on Monday night. Green Bay is a 13.5-point favorite, and the total is 42. Saints defensive back Alontae Taylor has been targeted 92 times in coverage, and he's allowed 60 receptions. Both are the second most. He's allowed 856 yards, and that's the most, and 5 touchdowns, but also has 13 passes defensed, which is the most in the league without an interception. The Packers lead the NFL with 7.1 yards after the catch this season, with Jaden Reed and Tucker Kraft leading the team. Now, Tucker Kraft, he is a favorite on this show. Why? Because he has a 100% prop hit rate. That's the most of any player who we've picked at least 3 times, and we've picked him correctly 5 times. Well, he paces all tight ends with 9.3 yak per reception, and Jaden Reed is 4th among receivers at 7.9. New Orleans has allowed the 4th most yak per reception at 6.3 yards per catch, and the most yak over expected at 451 yards. Bottom line, the Saints' injury list keeps getting longer, and between Jordan Love's streak of having a 100-plus passer rating in 5 games, second longest in Packer history to Aaron Rodgers, and of course, Josh Jacobs, who I haven't even talked about yet because I'm saving him for props, I have the Packers with a win 28-15, and this ranks number 2 in confidence. Both the Packers and Bills wins are above 72% in my models. I like when streaks align with my numbers because Green Bay has scored 30 or more points in 4 straight games. That's the second longest active streak behind the Bills. Even if the Packers managed to get upset at home, they potentially could have already made it to the postseason by virtue of the fact that the Falcons and Rams or Seahawks could have already played. So they could make it ahead of kickoff if the Falcons and the Rams or Seahawks lose. Falcons losing is a must, and between one of the two, LA and Seattle, one of those has to lose. Let's move on to the team Green Bay beat last week, the Seattle Seahawks, who have a second difficult draw this week with the Vikings coming to town as field goal road favorites. The total is 43 points. One of the things I don't think I hear enough about is how good the Vikings defense is at stopping the run. I'm guilty of talking about their blitzing, and of course, there are run blitzes, but most of the time when we're talking about blitzing, we're talking about passing downs. But one metric that they've been in the top 5 all season long in has been their ability to limit yards before contact per carry allowed. That's a lot of words, but on defense, the lower number is better. And theirs is 0.9 yards, which is the 3rd fewest in the league. They're also 4th best at limiting rushing yards over expected. This is also a strength versus weakness matchup, as Kenneth Walker has been contacted behind the line of scrimmage at the highest rate in the NFL this season at 55%. The Seahawks are one of 4 teams to have 5 players each having a pressure rate above 10%. Boye Mafe, Derek Hall, Draymond Jones, Jaron Reed, and Leonard Williams. Those are the 5. And this has helped them earn the 4th highest unblocked pressure rate in the league, among other things. One matchup to watch is Derek Hall and Boye Mafe, who rotate, but both play more than 43% of the time on the defensive right edge, which means they would line up against Cam Robinson. The Vikings left tackle has allowed 39 pressures since joining the team in week 9. That is the most of any offensive lineman over that time. And because it is Derek Hall's first time on the show, we got to give his numbers. He has 44 pressures, including 17 quick ones. Bottom line, I have a 2-point win for the road team Vikings, 23-21. However, this only ranks 12th in confidence. Injuries to the Seahawks, including Geno Smith, shape this uncertainty. For example, 2 weeks ago, this was slated in my models as a Seahawks win, but forecast production decreases have changed that. One other note. If Geno Smith doesn't play, please know my score will shift to a more than 3-point win for the Vikings. I will tweet accordingly. Seattle's loss in Week 15 put the Rams atop the NFC West, and now LA controls their own playoff destiny. They are a field goal road favorite in a matchup with Aaron Rodgers and the Jets. The total in this one is 46.5 points. I have said this a few times, but it bears repeating. Matthew Stafford is the reason I created a metric that measures a quarterback's ability to perform on the drive after being pressured. I started this when he was a Lion and getting leveled on the regular, but since becoming a Ram, he has actually improved his already league-leading ability to make this happen, meaning the metric is asking what happens after they're pressured. Can they convert or score a touchdown after a pressured down? Stafford does this on 44.4% of drives after he's been pressured over the past 3 seasons. The next closest quarterback, 42.1%. Last week in their win over the Jags, Devontae Adams finished with 198 yards on 9 receptions off of 12 targets, along with 2 touchdowns, all of which in the second half. He also earned nearly all of his yards, 191 of them to be exact, off of just 3 different route types, 95 on goes, and both of his touchdowns, 53 on crossing routes, and 43 on just 1 slant. Bottom line, I had to get my Stafford note in here because someday I want to be a Hall of Fame voter. So I'm starting to build the case for why I can build fun cases. Anyways, the biggest advantage in this one is Stafford's quick passing. He has the 10th fastest time to throw since week 10 at 2.75 seconds with 7 touchdowns and a 124.2 passer rating. He also is averaging 7.8 yards per attempt, which all rank in the top 3 in the league over that span. The Jets defense has allowed the 5th most EPA to quick passes and the 9th highest passer rating on them. Rams win in a close one, 24-23, which only ranks 15 of 16 in confidence. The Giants are not playing for a postseason berth, but do take a trip to Atlanta where the Falcons are not out of the playoffs yet. The Falcons are favored by 10 in a game where the total is 41 points. I spent way too much time looking for info on how many times in a quarterback's first start late in the season they were 10-point favorites, but I couldn't find much that was reliable. If you have something that tells us that info, please send it to me. But as we know, Michael Penix Jr. is set to make his debut. Let's do the Giants fact first because that is how our show is structured. And it's Brian Burns, who's generated 57 pressures this season, the most by a Giants defender and the 7th most among all defenders. He splits his time between the left and right edge and will likely have more luck against Jake Matthews at left tackle, who's allowed the 4th highest pressure rate at the position compared with Caleb McGarry, who ranks 16th lowest among right tackles. Okay, it is Penix time. The 2 things that will likely be different with Penix starting are, number 1, quarterback mobility, including scrambles, and number 2, play action. The first is kind of a no-brainer as Cousins' mobility, or lack thereof, has been a talking point all season long post-Achilles surgery. But with a guy like Bijan doing excellent things this season, leveraging play action is a very logical game plan. However, they've only used it on 14% of plays with Cousins, which is the lowest rate for any qualified quarterback. We've talked about how this is confounding because Cousins was the best at it as measured in touchdowns and passer rating from 2018 to 2023 as a Viking. One thing we don't talk a lot about this time in the season is what happens with rookie quarterbacks when they transition to the NFL. Well, they don't play a lot under center in college. Add on top of that Raheem Morris said that he hadn't been taking a lot of reps with the ones, so the skill players, do they have the chemistry? And let's even compound that further. He's a lefty, which is not a righty like Kirk Cousins. So I would say look for rushes out of the shotgun and a little bit of an uptick in play action. Bottom line here, rushing is a smart play for the Falcons in this one. The Giants have missed about 14% of their tackle attempts this season. That's the 8th highest rate in the league. And they've allowed the most yards because of these missed tackles at 978. Bijan has forced the most missed tackles at 92 overall. 74 of them have come on rushes. The Falcons take this one, giving Penix his first start and win on the same day, 26-17. Falcons winning ranks number 3 in confidence of the week's games. This is a great time for our second list, the top end touchdown scores. 5 big names who forecast for big games and a trip or so to the end zone. Number 1, Bijan Robinson. Not only do the Giants miss tackles at a top 8 rate overall, but they miss tackles on outside rushes at the highest rate and allow the most rushing yards over expected on such rushes. Guess who has the highest outside rushing rate in the league this season? Bijan at 74%. Number 2, here he is, Josh Jacobs. 11 of Josh Jacobs' 12 rushing touchdowns this season have come since week 8. 9 of them have come in the last 5 games. And the Saints, by the way, they're allowing the 6th most rushing yards per game. Number 3, Jamar Chase. He's averaging 14.2 yards per target on downfield passes this season, the 6th most in the NFL. More on that game later. Number 4, Saquon Barkley. He did have 2 scores against the Commanders the first time around, but in this one, it's all about the rushing yards over expected and ability to force missed tackles. And number 5, Brock Bowers. He has 103 yards after the catch over expected this season, the 3rd most among all tight ends. The Jags, they've allowed the most yak in the NFL by about 200 yards. The Raiders host the Jags this week as 1-point home favorites in a game where the total is 39.5 points. Right now, the Giants hold the first pick in the NFL draft, and the Raiders are number 2. The Jags would be picking 6th as of now. Jacksonville running back Tank Bigsby has forced 49 missed tackles on 136 attempts. That's a 36% rate and good for the 3rd highest in the league. The Raiders have missed tackles at the 10th highest rate. Bigsby has also earned 1 rushing yard over expected per carry this season. That's 4th highest. And his 4.3 yards per carry after contact ranked 2nd highest at the position. The Raiders have allowed the 11th most yards after contact per carry and 2nd most RYOE per carry. Raiders quarterback Desmond Ridder completed 11 of 15 passes thrown in under 2.5 seconds against the Falcons for 114 yards and a touchdown, which means, especially with a hip injury, that, by the way, he seems to be practicing as of this recording, If he is playing, it's still smart to use quick passes, and whoever's playing quarterback, really. The Jags have allowed 6.8 yards per quick pass attempt this season, ninth most in the league. Bottom line, I have the Jags by 20-19. That's an upset in Las Vegas. Max Crosby not being there is a huge deal and decreases Mac Jones' chances of a giveaway, especially a giveaway that impacts scoring. This, however, ranks 16 of 16, so the least confident in all of my picks on the week. The Panthers are currently slated to have the 4th pick in the draft, and they host the Cardinals this week. Arizona is a 4.5-point road favorite, and the total is 47 points. James Conner has averaged 5.3 yards per carry and 0.6 RYOE per carry on outside rushes since week 13. Both are in the top 8 at the position. His 152 total yards on these rushes, that's good for third most. And Carolina, they have allowed the highest success rate on such runs, along with 5.4 yards per carry on them. That's the second most. Chuba Hubbard has averaged 5.4 yards per carry against light boxes. That's 7th most. And he has the highest percentage of his rushes that yield positive RYOE at 53%. The Cardinals load the box at the second lowest rate and have allowed the highest rushing success rate when they do. Will I be going back to the Chuba Hubbard well this week? He is my fantasy running back number 13. Let's see. Bottom line, Cardinals by 3, 23-20. Arizona winning ranks 10th in confidence. Fun fact, this is the 3rd different matchup in the Super Bowl era between starting quarterbacks, both listed at under 6 feet tall. Which brings us to our weekly wild cards. You know the drill. These are not the biggest names at their position. They weren't early round fantasy football picks, but this week, they have elevated end zone reaching odds based on their matchups. And this one keeps getting more fun as more and more teams are ruled out of the postseason. Number 1. Maybe you did draft this guy early, but Trey McBride, you heard me. I know he hasn't had a touchdown yet this season, and we are reaching historical ranges for receptions and yards without one. So we're going big right off the bat here. Not only have the Panthers allowed the most passing touchdowns with 27, they've allowed the most to tight ends at 10. Number 2, Chuba Hubbard. I'm back on him, baby. Did that tease from before work? Either way, I have him scoring in 55% of simulations. Number 3, Brian Thomas Jr. against the Raiders. Brock Bowers isn't the only rookie to score a receiving touchdown in this one in my model. Number 4, Chase Brown. He's played over 85% of his snaps since week 10 and is the 3rd most receiving yards over expected, along with the most receiving first downs by any running back over that span. And number 5, in that same game, Jerome Ford. DTR is the starting quarterback. He's the starting running back. The Bengals have allowed 18 rushing touchdowns. That's tied for 27th. You see how this math works. Which brings us to Cincinnati, where the Bengals still have a playoff pulse, but it is definitely a faint one. The Browns come to town with Dorian Thompson-Robinson as the starter. The Bengals are 7.5-point favorites. The total is 48 points. Jerry Jeudy leads the NFL in receiving yards with 586 and in yards after the catch with 184 on downfield targets since week 8. The Bengals, they have allowed opposing quarterbacks to generate the second highest success rate in the NFL on such passes. It's 55%. While the change of quarterback adds some uncertainty here, Jeudy is a bright spot in the passing game. On the other side of this matchup, downfield passing, also a thing. Joe Burrow has 18 touchdowns on them, the second most in the NFL. He has the 3rd best CPOE and the 8th highest EPA per dropback. The Browns, they've allowed 13 passing touchdowns and the 9th highest passer rating. Bottom line, Bengals by 9, 29-20, which keeps Cincinnati on pace to set franchise records in points per game. Right now they're tracking at 28.5, and passing yards per game, which is tracking at 271.4. Bengals winning ranks 4th in confidence. The Browns currently hold the 7th pick in the draft, and the Cowboys, they have played themselves out of a top 10 pick by winning 3 of their last 4 games. This week, they host the Bucs. Tampa is a 4-point favorite in a game where the total is 49.5 points. The Bucs are averaging 5.2 yards per rush on inside rushes, the 2nd best rate in the league, and the Cowboys allow the 3rd most such yards at 4.8 per carry. Baker Mayfield has 2,238 yards and 20 touchdowns on short passes this season. That paces the league and is also a career best for him. He's thrown short on 70% of his attempts, which is the 5th highest rate. And Dallas has allowed the most yards per pass, 6.9, and 6th most yak to short passes. Micah Parsons has generated pressure on 27.5% of his third down pass rushes this season, the highest rate in the NFL. He has 22 pressures and 4 sacks on this crucial down. I'm going to keep going back to the Parsons well until someone can stop him, but perhaps it's this week, which is Luke Gadecki. That's a tough matchup because the right tackle has held opposing pass rushers to the 11th lowest pressure rate at the position this season, but that's on all downs. Bottom line, I have the Bucs winning 26-21, and they rank 7th in confidence. Fun fact, unless you're a Cowboys fan, they've averaged allowing 12.5 more points per game at home versus the road. So even though I have the under by 2.5 points, you could consider the over. And last but not least, the Bears host the Lions. Detroit is favored by 6.5, and the total is 48. And to keep it all straight, the Bears are currently set to pick 8th in the draft. Jahmyr Gibbs has been contacted behind the line of scrimmage on just 40% of his carries outside the tackles this season. That's the second lowest at the position. That has helped him earn 2.4 yards before contact per carry, which is the third most. The man is fast. He has an 11.83 mile per hour speed at the line of scrimmage. That ranks 4th. Chicago has contacted backs behind the line of scrimmage on just the 4th lowest rate of outside rushes and allowed top 7 rates in both yards before contact allowed and rushing yards over expected allowed on outside runs. The Bears defense has generated the highest pressure rate in the NFL since their Week 7 bye. It's at 41%. That's up 7 percentage points from their pressure rate through the first 6 weeks of the season. However, the Bears have converted just 14% of their pressures into sacks since Week 8, the second lowest rate in the league. Bottom line, I still have the Lions winning 27-20, despite 16 defensive players alone being on IR. That is not surprisingly the most in the NFL, in part because Caleb Williams is still struggling on downfield passes. I know he had 2 touchdowns against the Lions in their first go-around on such passes, but overall he ranks bottom 2 in the league in completion percentage and CPOE on them. The Lions winning ranks 6th in confidence. It's time for our spicy and bland menu today. Bland ingredients first. Remember, these are the props that happen in at least 55% of my simulations. Number 1, Josh Allen to throw for more than 236.5 yards. I have 257 projected for him. I know the Pats have allowed the 7th lowest completion percentage on deep passes, but that's a little moot here because Allen really isn't throwing deep very often. Khalil Shakir exemplifies this as he's recorded 590 yards off of underneath routes. So those are ones that are less than 10 air yards. He also has 4 touchdowns on them. Number 2, Joe Burrow to throw for more than 1.5 touchdowns. He's had 3 or more passing touchdowns in 6 straight games, which is the 4th longest single season streak since 1970. Number 3, Tony Pollard to have more than 65.5 rushing yards against the Colts. I know he's listed as questionable, so I will tweet out a replacement if he doesn't go, but the man has netted a career-high 831 yards after contact, the 5th most among running backs, and the Colts have allowed the 5th most such yards on a per-carry basis. On to the spicies. These happen in at least 48% of simulations with enough volatility to make the juice worth the squeeze. Remember, normal spice levels are 2 blands and 1 spicy. My preferred recipe is 2 spicy and 1 bland. Number 1, Lamar Jackson to rush for more than 47.5 yards. He had 46 in Week 11, and that was off 4 attempts. He's also talked about needing to run more off script. This is spicy because the Steelers' defense is great at stopping the run, especially when offenses use heavy personnel. Number 2, Mike Evans to have more than 68.5 yards and a touchdown. I'm going to be honest, I meant to add him to the big name touchdown scores, so I had to do some math around if doing both things qualified here to make it spicy, and bam, it does. He's going to get to 1,000 yards. Baker will make sure of it. Number 3, Justin Jefferson to score a touchdown. This is at plus 120, so therefore someone thinks it's spicy. Maybe it's because for 2 games, he's reached the end zone at least 1 time in each game. Before that, he was on a 6-game dry, but I don't know. We will take it. Sam Darnold has 10 games with 2 or more passing touchdowns, and Seattle has allowed multiple in 3 straight games. As always, and especially at milestones like reaching 10,000 subscribers, thank you so much for hanging out. Look for a special episode about some college football playoff stats and numbers to know with my friend Dr. Ed. And next week, our schedule will be a little bit different due to the Christmas games, but we will get you all covered for every game though. Projections, scores, and more, they are already up. Remember, they update when the injury report comes out and as news comes out, so keep coming back once you hear things. And if you like the show, please like, subscribe, and pass it along so we can continue to grow.